Last time we traced how a series of brutal murders turned the peaceful hills of Tuscany into one of Europe's darkest mysteries. From the first killings in 1968 to the chaotic Sardinian Trail, the police, the press, the people of Florence were desperate for answers. By 1983, it was clear the monster wasn't done. And every time investigators thought they were close, he proved he was always one step ahead. Hi everyone, I'm Cora and welcome back to Crimes Across Borders. If you've seen part 1, you already know how deep this case runs. And if you haven't, don't worry, I will link it down below so you can catch up later. And just a quick heads up, this episode, just like the first one, includes discussions of violent crimes and real evidence. Nothing graphic, but definitely heavy. So if you're ready, let's get back to it. Because by the early 80s, Florence was terrified. And the hunt for the monster was about to begin. After the killings near Galuzzo, Florence was done pretending this was just a local crime. People were terrified. Couples stopped going out at night, bars closed early, and even police officers started taking their service weapons home. By now, there were 6 double murders on file. And the only thing really connecting them all was the same .22 caliber Beretta. So in late 1982, a special investigation team was formed. It was a mix of detectives from different units, ballistic experts, and prosecutors, all united under one goal: to catch the Mostro di Firenze. The media called them La Squadra Antimostro, the Monster Task Force. And honestly, they had one of the hardest jobs in Italian criminal history. They had little physical evidence, really unreliable witnesses, and the public breathing down their necks. But as months passed without another attack, the fear began to fade, at least a little. The headlines quieted down. People wanted to believe it was finally over. Maybe the killer had died or just moved on. And then just when life started to feel normal again, the monster came back. It was just after midnight on September 9th, 1984, in the quiet hills near Viccio, about 30 kilometers northeast of Florence. 21 Claudio Stefanacci and 18-year-old Pia Rontini had driven out in his little red Fiat Panda. Just a short escape from the heat, a private moment under the summer sky. A milkman on his morning route noticed the car pulled awkwardly near the edge of a field. The windows were fogged and the doors half open. He walked closer and froze. 2 bodies. Police arrived around 7 a.m. Claudio was still in the driver's seat. He was shot several times in the head and in the chest. Pia's body was found about 15 meters away. She was lying on her back in the grass. She's been shot once in the face and then again in the chest. And just like other women before her, she was mutilated post-mortem with the same cold precision. The autopsy confirmed what everyone already feared. Same .22 caliber, same Winchester H ammunition, same surgical cuts. But this time, something felt different. The car wasn't hidden deep in the woods. It was visible from the road, almost as if the killer didn't care anymore. He was confident, maybe even taunting them. And this wasn't just another couple. People in Viccio knew them. Claudio was a law student at the local university, quiet, polite, easygoing, and Pia worked part-time at the cafe in Florence and dreamed of becoming a flight attendant. She was studying English, saving her hard-earned money for courses, and she just turned 18. That night, she told her mother they were just going for a short walk. When they didn't come back, her parents began to worry immediately, especially knowing what was going on in the previous years. You can imagine what went through their heads straight away. And by morning, when they heard about the car found near Viccio, they rushed there, only to be stopped by the police at the roadblock. When her mother realized it was Pia's car, she apparently just collapsed right there on the road. At the crime scene, investigators recovered 7 shell casings. Same pattern, same markings. They also found 1 unspent bullet nearby, probably ejected while the killer reloaded. There was no tire marks and no clear footprints. The ground was too hard and dry to leave anything. They did, however, collect a strand of long, dark hair near the passenger door and few fibers on Pia clothes. They were possibly from a wool jacket, and it didn't belong to her. But just like everything else in this case, none of it ever led anywhere. And once again, the media descended like vultures. Reporters apparently broke through the police tape, and within 2 days, crime scene photos leaked to the press. The Rondini family was devastated. They later said they felt like their daughter had been killed twice, once by the monster and once by the headlines. Psychologists studying the pattern said the monster was growing more confident. It was slower, more deliberate. He was taking his time. There were little things showing that. For example, Pia's earrings were found carefully placed on the seat beside her. They weren't torn off. They were taken out and put next to her. It was as if he had all the time in the world. And that, of course, terrified investigators, because if he was this calm, what would happen next? The task force was still working full-time, rechecking ballistics, interviewing locals, even testing hundreds of gun owners. But nothing concrete ever came from it. And around that time, police also finally released a composite sketch based on the witnesses from the previous crime scene, and everything got worse. Sure, there were dozens of tips that came in, but so did the paranoia. People started calling the police on their neighbors, co-workers, even relatives. Men were followed, questioned, harassed in the streets just because they happened to look a little bit like the sketch. It got so bad that investigators had to go on TV and ask people to basically stop spreading rumors. Months went by, summer came and went, and the monster had gone quiet again for a whole year. And honestly, people didn't know what was worse anymore, the murders themselves or the waiting. Because at this point, they were all sure it's not over, he is going to strike again. And in September 1995, that silence finally broke. And it would be the monster's last known attack. In the hills near Scoperi, not far from San Cassiano, a man walking through the woods noticed a small grey tent just kind of hidden between the trees. From a distance, it looked just like a campsite. But the closer he got, the clearer it was that something wasn't right. The tent was slashed open. There was a sleeping bag that lay half out, and it was covered in blood. He ran immediately to call the Carabinieri. Inside the tent, police found the bodies of Jean-Michel Kraveshvili and Nadine Morion. It was a French couple who had been traveling through Italy on holiday. They parked their Volkswagen camper van nearby and decided to camp in the open for one last night before heading home. Jean-Michel was a 25-year-old musician, and Nadine, who was 36, worked as a teacher in France. They spent the week sightseeing in Florence and in San Gimignano, and their friends later said they loved camping and that Tuscany had always been their dream trip. What investigators found that morning looked almost like a battlefield. Nadine was found still partially inside the tent, shot and then mutilated post-mortem. The same surgical precision as before, the same 3 clean cuts. This time he removed the pubic area as well as her left breast. It looked like Jean-Michel had managed to escape, at least for a few seconds. Barefoot and wounded, he probably stumbled out of the tent, leaving a clear trail of blood and footprints through the trees. He was found about 30 meters away, stabbed to death near a small clearing. Then the killer set their camper on fire, as if trying to erase what he's done, or maybe to mark the end of it, get rid of potential evidence. The investigators are not sure. The scene was chaotic, but also quite revealing. There were 9 Winchester H shell casings, all matching the same 22 Beretta. And investigators also recovered some food wrappers, film rolls, and the couple's travel documents confirming their identity. They also found Jean-Michel's watch that had stopped at 12:20 a.m., likely during the attack. This time, the forensic work was handled much more carefully. The area was sealed off, photos were taken before the bodies were moved, and all evidence was catalogued properly. It was clear the police had learned from their earlier mistakes and they really tried to do better this time. So even though the weapon proved it was the monster again, there was something in that scene that was different. The couple wasn't in a car this time. They were camping in a tent. And that broke the killer's usual pattern. It made investigators wonder if he'd been following them or maybe just spotted the tent by chance and decided to attack. And another thing that also really disturbed the police is that the killer seemed to have stayed at the scene for quite a while. There were food remains found that didn't belong to the victims. It looked like whoever did this had stopped to eat afterwards. And it wasn't like he took the food from the victims. He brought his own. It's almost like he knew he's gonna get hungry after and, just decided to have a picnic. So it's like beyond anything you can reason with. And this would turn out to be the monster's last known attack. And after it, the trial went cold, completely cold. There was no new murders, no new letters, no phone calls, nothing. But for investigators, it didn't mean anything. That silence was as bad for them as the murders. It meant they were out of leads and they knew that any given moment he can strike again. Yet the task force had been chasing the same clues for over a decade now, and every trail led nowhere. By the late 80s, public trust in the police was collapsing. Families of the victims were demanding results, and Italy decided to do something it had, I think, never done before. They actually reached out to the FBI. Around 1989 or 1990, the Italian authorities, led by prosecutor Pierluigi Vigna and investigator Michele Giuttari, sent files, photos, and autopsy reports to Quantico, Virginia, home of the FBI Behavioral Science Unit. They wanted a psychological profile, something that might explain who the monster was and what could make someone capable of such cold, ritualistic violence. The FBI's report came back a few months later. According to the profile, the monster was a male, likely in his 40s, sexually repressed, possibly even impotent, with deep resentment towards women. They believed he was local, working class, familiar with tools and anatomy, and possibly someone who inserted himself into the investigation, someone who hung around police or just liked to help. Basically, they were describing a man who blended in perfectly. Ordinary, maybe even helpful, until you looked closer. And then a name surfaced. A man who fit some parts of the FBI's description, not all of them, but some. A man who had a record of violence, lived in the same hills as many of the murders, and on paper, at least, looked like the monster everyone was searching for. His name was Pietro Pacciani. When police arrested Pietro Pacciani in January 1993, it wasn't because of one specific breakthrough or piece of evidence. It was because of everything else about him. He was a violent man, and not just once. It was different reports over decades. In 1951, he murdered a man who'd been sleeping with his fiancée. He stabbed that man repeatedly, made the woman watch, and then sexually assaulted her on top of the body of the man he just killed. And I guess that doesn't exactly fit the MO of Florence monster, but at that time, that really didn't matter to the police. They found someone who was obviously an insane and evil person, and they just ran with it. So Pietro did go to jail for that crime, but he got out in 1960s and returned to a quiet farmhouse just outside Florence. But that quiet didn't last long. By the 1980s, Pacciani had been convicted of raping his own daughters. Neighbors said his house had a revolving door of women, prostitutes, troubled teens. Apparently, there were sexual gatherings in the woods. The media later labeled them as orgies in the Tuscan countryside. There were whispers of rituals, weapons, a circle of men who gathered for sex, money, and something darker no one wanted to say out loud. So when the police looked at this man living near multiple crime scenes, violent, sexually deviant, obsessed with dominance, they thought he has to be the monster. They didn't want to think that there might be more than one person like this living in that area. And there was some evidence, at least that's how it seemed at first. There was a .22 shell casing buried in his garden. And there was a box of Winchester ammo, just like the kind used in all the crimes. There was a box of violent porn hidden in a cabinet. And a friend of his, Mario Vanni, who told police Pacciani knew things about the murders no one else could have known. The media went wild. One headline read, "The monster lives among us," and he's a farmer. But the deeper investigators dug, the stranger it got. Yes, Pacciani was a monster in many ways, but was he the monster? The gun was never found. The bullet casing supposedly found in his yard, nobody remembered seeing it before it just showed up in an evidence locker, and there were strong suggestions that it was planted by the police officers just to have something linking him to the crimes of Monster of Florence. And then there was the timeline. Pacciani was imprisoned or under strict control during some of the earliest murders. But it was the same gun that has been used back then too, so was he working with someone else? Was someone else helping him while he was locked up? Or maybe someone was just framing him? This part of the investigation was called Compagnie di Merende, the companions of the picnic or snack companions. But basically it meant buddies who hang out to fool around in the countryside. They believed Pacciani was just one part of a group. Rural sex and violence circle. Men who swapped pornography, slept with the same women, and maybe even killed together. So when Pacciani went on trial in 1994, it wasn't just about one man. It was about the possibility that the monster wasn't a lone wolf, but a pack. In any case, Pacciani was convicted, sentenced to life, but just 2 years later, he appealed, and this time the court overturned the verdict. Why, you may ask? Because the evidence was inconclusive, contaminated, and even possibly planted. Italian justice admitted something that public had already feared. Maybe they arrested the wrong man, or at least not the only man. The trial was supposed to start again, but before it could begin, on February 22nd, 1998, Pietro Pacciani was found dead at home. Apparently it was a heart attack, but there was no autopsy. And end of story. Well, at least for Pietro, because the case didn't end with him. At this point, the prosecutors believed he wasn't working alone, that the monster was not just one man, but a small circle of men. And that's where the two other names enter the story. Mario Vanni, friend of Pacciani and a former postman, and Giancarlo Lotti, a quiet, troubled local man with a history of alcohol abuse. In the late 1990s, both of them stood trial, called by the press snack companions. At some point, Lotti even confessed to being present at some of the murders. He said he only acted as a lookout, while Vanni and Pacciani carried out the killings. Eventually, both men were convicted. In 2000, Lotti was sentenced to 26 years in prison, and Vanni was given life without parole. But even with those convictions, the biggest questions still never got answered. The gun was never found. Several murders happened while the suspects were already in custody, and all the forensic mistakes from the 70s and the 80s meant a lot of evidence was just lost forever. So today, legally, the Monster of Florence case is still open, and with no clear DNA match, no weapon, and no final confession from anyone, we are left to wonder. Was it even Pacciani? Was it a group of companions, as the court suggested, or was the real monster someone else entirely? Someone who watched from the shadows while the police circled the Roman. So now that we've gone through all the murders and suspects, arrests, and all the courtroom drama, let's talk theories. Because honestly, there's still no single answer that ties this case together neatly. One of the most talked about theories comes from the book The Monster of Florence. I already mentioned this book. It was written by Mario Spezzi and Douglas Preston. In it, Spezzi makes a bold claim. He says that the murders might not have been committed by Pacciani or his companions at all, but by someone much closer to the Vinci family. So do you remember Francesco Vinci, one of Barbara Loci's lovers, the jealous and violent one? Although I think they were all somewhat jealous and violent. But according to this theory, his son Antonio Vinci stole the murder weapon. Francesco did mention that he used to have a gun that was matching what the police was looking for, but it was stolen. He never said who stole it or if he suspected anyone. He just said he doesn't have it anymore. So the idea is this. The first murder in 1968 was done by Salvatore, Francesco, or Giovanni, or all of them together. But the 7 murders after that, the ones known as the monsters killings, those were committed by someone else entirely, Antonio Vinci. I mean, I'm not saying this theory is 100% correct, but I do see how it could nicely fit a lot of things. And was Wild police actually investigated Antonio Vinci for a while, but the case was dropped due to lack of evidence. They literally had nothing to tie him to the case. And like most things in this case, it just drifted away. And another eerie detail I wanted to add, I haven't mentioned it in the previous video either, was that almost all of the murders happened on weekends, often close to special holidays, and on moonless nights. So people and police were wondering if it was symbolic. Was the killer following some kind of ritual, or did he just prefer dark skies and empty roads? They never figured out definite answer for it. So nobody knows. But when you zoom out and look at the timeline, yeah, it's a little bit unsettling. And a lot of you may wonder about the Netflix series. Does it offer answers? Is it true to the story? To be honest, it's quite dramatizing the whole story. It's softer in some moments, more sensational in others. It's a show. It focuses on mood and mystery, and not necessarily on the evidence. But if someone is enjoying this type of shows, they will probably enjoy this one as well. I wonder if the real killer is still alive and if he watched the show. If he is alive, he's probably in his 70s or 80s, so it's quite possible he is. So even after all the trials, suspects, and interrogations, the case is still open. Just in the last few years, new DNA work has started to rewrite parts of the story. Scientists recently confirmed that Giovanni Vinci, one of the brothers in Barbara Locci's Tangled Love Life, was actually the biological father of little Natalino Mele, the little 6-year-old boy found barefoot in the night back in 1968. And that revelation opens an entirely new question. If Giovanni was the father, did he know about it? Why was Natalino left alive that night? Was it because someone knew who his real father is? Was it his real father being there at the scene of the crime, or one of his brothers? And since we are talking about the Vinci brothers, Francesco Vinci, the other lover, he was recently, I think back in 2023, his body was exhumed, and I think I haven't mentioned it in a previous video, but in August 1993, police found a burnt car in the Pisa countryside, and in its burnt trunk, they found two bodies inside. One thought to be Vinci and the other his shepherd servant. There was a lot of theories that Vinci wasn't actually dead, that it wasn't his body. So now DNA confirmed that the body found in the trunk was indeed Francesco, and prosecutors are now comparing his DNA against preserved crime scene material. It's something they couldn't done before, so it might come out with some type of breakthrough. I'm not sure if we ever going to get a perfect ending here. Maybe the real killer died before anyone ever even suspected him. Maybe they actually did get him. Maybe it was Pacciani and his snack buddies. And maybe the truth is out there, quietly buried under bad policing, missing evidence, fear. And maybe we will get it with the current changes in technology, perhaps all the little DNA that they did manage to preserve. Maybe something will come out of it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Was it Pacciani, the Vinci family, one man or a group? And if you're new here, I'm Cora and this is Crimes Across Borders. We dive here into Europe's most compelling true crime cases every Sunday. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and until then, stay curious, stay safe, and don't forget to lock your car doors.